The next item now, which is item 12, the draft regional land transport plan. That's to be put out for consultation. So we are welcoming an assortment of dignitaries to the front. They'll be led off by Hamish Bunn, but also present we have Richard Leggett, the Regional Transport Committee Chair, Dean Kimpton, Idris Jones, Robert Simpson from Auckland Council. Steve, was Steve coming up, or he's, oh yeah, Steve Martin from NZTA is in the room, and Gwyneth McLeod from Kiwi Rail. And as I said, the purpose of this item is to seek endorsement from our committee for this plan to go out for consultation. Over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to make a few introductory comments, some of which Hamish may well and or Robert cover again. But number one is that the RLT process is always quite challenging. This year it has been incredibly challenging, and my heartfelt thanks to these guys that have put this together in a very compressed time frame with a draft LTP, a draft GPS, a change of government priorities. It has not been an easy task at all. So I think they have done a very good job, and from the chair of the RTC, thank you very much for your efforts. And I know Hamish, I don't know quite so much about Robert, but Hamish has been working day and night to get this thing done. Secondly, my strong impression is that we have worked very hard to be aligned with the LTP, and we are very appreciative of the draft LTP and the funding commitment to the transport area. And I think the two teams, the executives, have worked very well together. So I think the alignment is good. Can't quite say so much on the GPS. And one of the challenges with the RLTP and pulling it together is that the GPS and the government change of tact in a number of areas has challenged the prioritisation and what may or may not be funded. So I think Council's view and our view as the RTC is that, and I like the hierarchy of maintain, optimise, grow, new. And I think that is a hierarchy and it is worth following. And so finishing what we have started fits into that hierarchy. With this GPS, there are a number of new initiatives that are expensive and will take money away from the maintaining, optimising and growing. And a very good example is in the asset classes, the state highway asset class is funded well, certainly in the first 3 years, versus the public transport improvement activity class. For example, all our projects are ranked, and on the basis of the current GPS, which is was very dependent on what percentage Auckland gets, in the state highway activity class, projects ranked 100, so 1 is non-discretionary and 100 is very discretionary, 100 get funded. In the public transport improvement activity class, you have to be better than 10 to be likely to get funded. So there is a misalignment in terms of how the funding potentially is going to line up against the priorities that you as council and we as Auckland Transport have. I think Hamish will talk a bit more about that. The last point I'd like to make, and it was interesting listening to the Auckland Integrated Transport Plan discussion. We, and as RTC and me, are very keen on the idea of having a 30-year plan. It would make the RLTP development a whole lot easier. And one of the things that I think is worth considering is whether actually the RTC, because we do have representations of Kiwi Rail, NZTA and Auckland Transport and Council would be part of that, the RTC could be a body that helped put together a plan. So we would look at what Auckland might be like demographically, population-wise, etc., in 30 years, and we develop a comprehensive transport plan. Now, the work Robert described earlier is part of that, without doubt. But I do think that if we could have a 30-year plan of what the transport system would look like, chunk it down into 10-year blocks, and use that and get bipartisan central government and agency support, it would mean that when we come to the RLTP every 3 years, it's a whole lot easier to develop because we have at least tacit agreement from the government and agencies that actually we've got a plan, this is what we want to stick to it, please don't go and hear off and do other things, which is what tends to happen with political cycles. So that was all I want to say. It was thank you very much to Hamish and the team and Robert for putting this together. It's very difficult and challenging. We do have a challenge within the activity classes. And lastly, having a 30-year integrated transport plan for Auckland would be a really good thing. And I think the RTC could be one body that might be useful in utilising the development of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Richard. So today we're here to seek the committee's endorsement of the draft regional land transport plan that will be going up for consultation. So this is an endorsement before the document is approved for consultation by the Regional Transport Committee, who has the sort of statutory responsibility for that. And then we're expecting to go, consultation will start on 17 May and run for a month or so. So by way of background, I think most of you have been on this journey with us in developing this RLTP, but I'll recap anyway. So the RLTP it's a statutory document. Its key role is to present the region's proposals for funding from the National Land Transport Fund. So it's essentially a kind of a bid document in that it's got the proposals that we're seeking to get funding for fuel taxes for the Auckland share of project funding from NZTA in the case of Auckland Transport, or in the case of Kiwi Rail and NZTA, the full funding for the cost of those projects. A critical thing too about this RLTP, and I'll touch on it a little bit more, I mean the nature of it as incorporating everybody's proposals means that there's more proposals than there is funding, so that does make it very much about prioritisation of all those proposals. As I've said, it's a multi-agency document. It's incorporating the plans from the other 3 agencies. And it must be consistent with the government policy statement on land transport. So it is intended to align with government policy. Kind of makes sense because we're essentially bidding for funding from a national fund. This RLTP, we're very aware of the direction from the council in previous CCO review and statement of intent to develop it jointly with our council colleagues. So they've been part of this process and included, for example, on the working group as we've considered and prioritised the main projects here. So we've been very pleased to have that support. So in terms of the Auckland Transport Program that's included within the RLTP, again, you've been on that journey with us. It started with the Mayor's $14 billion transport program proposal that went out for consultation, although we did have the change at the end of that where it was announced that the regional fuel tax would be removed. So we had the process with the 2 workshops on 10th and 24th of April working through, okay, well, what can we take out of Auckland Transport's program in order to sit within the broad likely long-term plan funding allocation. And you'll recall that the projects that were proposed for removal from that plan were the some of the key ones that outlined in Appendix 2 of, the attachment to the covering report. But anyway, the key ones were the botany interchange and link component, and then, for example, elements of our business technology program, elements of the Takanini level crossings, and a variety of other smaller reductions. So that was to sit within that impact of the removal of the regional fuel tax. But the key point is that, overall, the AT program set out in RLTP is aligned to the long-term plan. We do note that the long-term plan hasn't been completely finalised, so we have said within that within the draft document that we will update it as if there are any changes in the finalisation of the document. Turning to the document itself, the draft that you've been provided with, unfortunately, it was still a sort of draft in development because of timeframe constraints, but we will be working to kind of tidy that up, improve the language, get some more summary material in there and simplify the whole thing. However, the key story in this RLTP is really the challenge about the kind of scale of funding bids versus the actual money that's likely to be available. When we've finally done the additions for the program, it has come out at a total of proposed investment in Auckland of $63 billion over the next 10 years. That's more than the number that's included in your cover report, because we've included some other aspects such as New Zealand Up and contributions to CRL that we didn't have in that number. So on one hand, that's a great thing. There's a lot of great projects being suggested and put up for prioritisation. However, on the other hand, that's not likely to be all affordable. So one of the key things that this RLTP document is signals the region's priorities about where the funding should go. So just to give a little bit more of a breakdown of that though, so of that 63 billion, around 34 of that we're saying is non-discretionary. And that is proposed to go to maintenance, operations and renewals. We've said one of the themes of this has been our renewals of our network, particularly Auckland Transport's network is really facing some issues. So there's a real emphasis both from the council and government on making sure that we get that renewals right, deal with the potholes, and ensure our infrastructure is fit for purpose as a high priority. So we've put that in there. The other elements of that is PT services. So we're proposing the funding for PT services that would fund all of our existing programs, plus enable City Rail Link operations, plus enable a whole range of improvements to services, particularly frequent bus networks, incorporate the climate action targeted rate proposals as well. So we're proposing that that's non-discretionary. Don't want to argue about that. And then, of course, there's committed projects that are underway, such as City Rail Link, Eastern Busway. Of the remaining 28 billion, that is really kind of up for prioritisation. A large chunk of that, around about 14 billion, is state highways, and then around about 10 billion of that, depending on the way we cut the numbers, is public transport. So, and particularly rapid transit projects. So those are some of the big elements that are coming through in terms of the proposals that we have for this RLTP. As you're aware, we went through a prioritisation exercise with the information that we had to say, all right, which of these projects do we think is most important when we put it up against the combination of regional and government priorities? And you'll recall we workshopped that with you, I think, on the 6th of March. And so we've scored all of the projects that we are saying are discretionary or optional. And what's come out of that, as Richard stated, is that the public transport projects in particular, generally speaking, the highest priority overall, followed by walking and cycling, and then the kind of local road projects. And then the relatively lowest priority has been the state highway investment. Now, That's, of course, a relative thing. All of these things are priorities. We would like them all. But because there are funding constraints, we've got to make some choices and provide some advice about where we think the priorities lie. And that's the way that it's played out. And you can see that in the response chapter that's in the document. But the key issue is that the funding, when we compare those priorities against the likely funding from the government policy statement activity classes, or at least the draft government policy statement, we're seeing that the public transport projects are probably at the highest risk of not receiving funding, whereas at least over the first 3 years, the state highway projects, even if they're a relatively low priority, would be likely to receive funding. And that reflects the kind of national direction of where they're proposing to put the money. So I suppose the big conclusion from this, in terms of the Regional Land Transport Plan as a signal of the region's priorities, is that we're really saying, oh, hey, we don't think the funding is necessarily in the right place. We think particularly over the next 3 years, there needs to be a higher allocation towards public transport and potentially a lower allocation towards state highways. Now, one of the jokers in the pack is, of course, that the GPS says that we will get additional funding sources and they will help address some of this problem. So, you know, that may change the picture as well, but I think, you know, in terms of the challenges there, it'll be great to see, have a better sense of what some of those numbers are as we go forward. So the big message here, as I've said, and as Richard stated, is that, you know, in terms of the advice, in terms of the signal that we're putting back to government, is we think we need to look again at the allocations to make sure more of those public transport projects that have come out as a really high priority can get the funding. So that's a quick summary. As I said, the next step is for the Regional Transport Committee to approve the document for a consultation release on the 14th, and we're out to consultation on the 17th. Of course, we want to test these, our priorities, our views with the public and take feedback from Aucklanders. So to that end, we've got a publicity campaign set up with radio ads and all those kinds of things. There'll be a mail drop. I think we've got up to sort of 25 public engagement meetings planned. We've got webinars. So we've got the full kind of suite of engagement, and there'll be a hearings process at the end of that. And then also there are opportunities for the local boards, of course, to provide feedback as well as part of that process. So we'll be working hard on that engagement and looking forward to the public feedback. So that's a very quick summary, hopefully. And as I said, what we're looking for is your endorsement of the draft so we can move forward. That's, of course, noting that we will be tidying up the document to improve it some more. Thank you.
Thanks, Hamish. And we do have some resolutions moved by the Deputy Mayor and seconded by the Deputy Chair of the committee that have been emailed out to councillors. But before we get to that, we'll open up to questions, bearing in mind the rather delicate balancing act with time constraint thrown in for good measure that sees us with this regional prioritisation, which also must be consistent with the government transport policy. So it's kind of like a bid, really, as far as I can see. So let's throw over to Member Brown to start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Starting us off, awesome. Just looking at the sort of life cycle of consultation, and, you know, priorities can be nuanced depending on the community that you're engaging with. So I guess you have engagement, feedback, the identification of key areas of concern or interest. On one hand, you could influence plans and policies, you could execute solutions to make a difference and make contributors feel like they're being heard. Or on the other side, you could record but not act upon, or crickets. So just as a bit of a litmus test here, it's got 3 questions there. you sort of detailed, but they're not really because I hear them come up quite often. Are you able to identify how you intend to provide accessible public transport routes to Marae and Kura?
Sure. So, sorry, one of the things I probably should have clarified is that the regional land transport plan's mainly focused on our capital program. It's the regional public transport plan that deals with more of the bus access routes, if that's what you're discussing. So, but nevertheless, that accessible bus transport routes to those were to Marae and Kura were a focus of the last RPTP. It's one of the things we needed to take into account. So some of our service improvements have been targeted very much at shifting routes to allow that access. And I've got a list here of perhaps 5 or 6 routes, public transport routes that we're looking at either providing service improvements or tweaking the kind of route itself to see if we can provide improved access. So there are things that are being done in terms of the way that we do our public transport planning to take account of that, and I can send that list through to you.
Please, and I guess that sort of answers the second question about the analysis of public transport routes and whether it's been undertaken to ensure accessibility. I guess I'll wrap that up in that last question, but the last question is just, do you know what proportion of Kura Kaupapa or Kura Iwi and Kohanga have appropriate speed signage and or speed bumps, very controversial, to reduce speed around our tamariki?
So thank you very much to the safety team who provided me with this information very quickly. So of Kura Kaupapa, of our 12 that we've identified, I understand that 6 have safe and appropriate speed limits implemented, and the remaining 6 have those proposed, which were consulted on. So, and some of those also have speed calming devices around them, such as raised zebra crossings.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I mean, the high level view is always good for us as I guess governors, but it's nice to sort of land the plane sometimes and just ask a few questions. So thank you for that.
No problem. I'll provide you that list as well, because the Kohanga Reo and other ones have also got speed limits and safe and appropriate speeds as well. So thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Brown. You'll have to give us some advice on question framing. You're very successful in getting very detailed responses. Okay, so we've got a lineup of other councillors here. Councillors Ferry, Henderson, Dalton, Baker and Hills.
Thanks, Chair. I've got 2 questions for the staff, but I've just got a question first for the Chair around, or maybe the mover and seconder around the resolutions in red. We're putting out a draft for consultation. I'm just kind of a bit confused about why we also seem to have a whole lot of resolutions that would apply to the final. That seems to be what the intention is. There's no mention of those being the draft. So maybe that's something to have a think about while we continue the discussion.
You're right that the main business of the day is to endorse the plan, but there's nothing to stop people moving the resolutions. Well, we're in questions at the now, so let's tie-ho in that till we get to the point of actually addressing what's been moved.
But I kind of, all right. Well, I guess.
Ask your questions.
Okay, I would like to know, Chair, though, when we're going to address. Are we just going to debate these resolutions? Well, there's not going to be any ability to have conversation. We only got them emailed to us 9 minutes ago.
Well, as I said, we'll discuss this at the appropriate time. The appropriate time now is for asking questions. So
Okay.
we will
So at
answer
the end of questions, we'll have conversation about those resolutions.
That's what I've said.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I've got 2 questions, one of which has been passed on to me from a concerned local board member. It refers to a very, very small budget line, which has been deferred or recommended for deferral, which is the wayfinding for cycling. And the question is whether that will have an impact on local boards' ability to be able to do wayfinding projects, say, with their local board capital transport fund. I always get that acronym around the wrong way, sorry, but you know what I mean. Yeah, so will we still have capacity within the organisation if a local board wanted to do some of that work themselves to be able to do it if they were going to fund it? I think that's really the key.
Thank you. We've preserved the local board capital fund.
Yes.
So as far as I'm aware, yes, they should be able to. I mean, one of the issues that we had is that you'll recall that some of the guidance in the GPS seemed like it was going to make it less likely for that kind of thing to receive match funding. So as long as they're comfortable potentially without having the NZTA subsidy, I can't see off the top of my head why there'd be any reason that they couldn't do that.
Cool. So they're not going to say, you know, we want to do this project, put it to AT say, sorry, we don't have the capacity to do that because they're funding it fully.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect that would happen. I mean, the reduction in that wayfinding budget is just reflecting that, you know, given the removal of the regional fuel tax, we had to find some areas to reduce.
Yeah, I understand that. We worked through that in the workshop. It's not something I would have chosen, but I know that, you know, it's the one of the ones that probably makes sense. The other question is a much bigger one, sorry, which is around level crossings. So, and we've got a resolution up there, which in theory I would be quite keen to support, but it doesn't seem to be reflected in the draft. So I'm unclear about how D connects to what we're doing when we're endorsing the draft. Are we asking for the draft to be updated to show that grade separation? Sorry, this isn't a question for you guys, I guess. But are we, because at the moment there's actually not very much in there that indicates spending on level crossings at all. I understand that we have been talking about that we potentially need a different mechanism from the RLTP in order to fund because of the quantum and the complexity of that work. However, to not mention it sufficiently in the RLTP when we don't have that mechanism yet, I think is really risky. I think, you know, we're putting this out for consultation, so I'm hoping that that's some feedback we'll get and we can change that before we sign off on a final or before a final is signed off on. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, please.
And Mr. Chair, perhaps I respond from an RLTP perspective, and then if there's comments from the perspective of the recommendation. So the level crossings, just to reiterate, the funding needed for the CRL Day 1 operations, that's in there. We're regarding that as non-discretionary. That's kind of a non-issue. The other issue was Takanini level crossings, and you'll recall that we did have, I think, $130 million in there in the original $14 billion proposal, but then that was, as you said, one of the ones that we said that, you know, we think we need to reduce because it's not clear how this whole program would be funded. We've captured that point in the RLTP draft, and I think it's in the version that you've got. It's certainly in a version that I was working on this morning that says, you know, we do see the level crossings as a priority if additional funding comes forward. So it scored, you know, quite highly in terms of the public transport scoring, but one of the, you know, the secondary issues is, okay, well, if you go ahead with this, how does it fit with all the other pieces of the puzzle? And that's why we're saying we kind of need that bigger solution. However, if there was a significant increase in council funding and we had confidence that it was matched by NZTA, then it'd be great to start resolving that.
Thank you. I'm comfortable to send this out to consultation, but I think that is something we're going to have to beef up in the final. Thanks.
All right, Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, I just want to clarify, again, apologies for the more fundamental question, but does this have to be consistent with the GPS? I thought this was our bid. Those two things are somewhat contradictory. Which one are we doing?
Yeah, that is one of the essential challenges that we have in putting this document together. We'd quite like it to be quite biddy, but we also have to hit the consistency. So, that's a balance that we are trying to hit. I do think, hopefully we've struck that balance correctly, and that, we're going out, we've gone through the prioritisation process. That's been as kind of objective as we could make it in the timeframes. That's showing where the scoring is at and where the emphasis is at, and where the regional priorities are. But the consistency is that we're still trying to reflect government's priorities. We still have those projects within the program, and we're just giving a view of where they sit within the regional prioritisation. So I think that's how we're trying to square that circle.
Sure. Okay. And I've sort of asked about this before, but at a fundamental level, will this draft plan meet our climate goals?
It'll certainly help, take steps towards them. I think that the work that we did on the VKT plan earlier this year, or was it late last year, suggested that, to get all the way towards the kind of scale of change that has been talked about needs a significantly higher increase in funding than what we're talking about here. And it needs other signals like wider pricing schemes and a whole variety of other things. So positive steps towards it, but not as far as we would want to go.
So can we say with certainty that this draft plan will bring down our transport climate emissions?
We haven't done the modelling to say that, but it'll be, part of that is the impact of the state highway program changes might have on the overall program. But there's still a significant amount of investment in public transport and mode shift and supporting those things. A lot of those state highway projects are on the periphery where it's hard to say how much impact they might have overall. So yeah, I think our expectation is that this program will certainly contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We're also proposing significant investment in the likes of decarbonising the ferry fleet and supporting the electrified bus fleet. So, there's a lot in here for climate emissions. It was one of the key objectives that we look to work towards, so I think there's a lot to be positive about.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, next Councillor Dalton.
My question was asked by Julie and it's around the resos, so I'll wait.
Okay, Councillor Baker. Geez, have to put up more red additions in normal questioning. Councillor Hills, same?
Kia ora, Chair. No, I have some questions, just maybe an easy one, maybe a hard one. The 2.7 billion for public transport services, which are mostly covered in the RPTP, where does that fit in the green, orange, yellow, red? Where do we expect ourselves to fall if we're looking at the midpoint?
Well, there was the initial work in the GPS that identified that there were some significant risks there. I'm looking to see if Dean's around. But my understanding is that subsequent work and discussions with the ministry and minister has indicated that, we're expecting that at least the existing services, City Rail Link, related services will be fine, and then it's a case of how much further it can go into funding the bus improvements. And we're also reflecting that as part of that, we need to make improvements in fare recovery. So that's a key assumption that we've made as well. So my understanding is it's certainly more positive than we thought in the initial GPS submission, but we can't tell for sure until the final GPS lands and then we get the NLTP.
Okay. Thank you. If I'm reading it correct, so you've chosen the midpoint, which obviously makes sense, but you've also assumed, well, I think my assumption is that the dark greens are likely to be the only? Like, how can we assume we'd get more than 40% of an activity class when?
Yeah, I mean, that coloration is very much just an indicator. The way that I understand NZTA will make these decisions is based on their assessment using, what's it called? The IPL, their methodology. And Steve, if you want to come up and talk to this, you can feel free. But anyway, so it'll be an NZTA view of the merit of the projects based primarily on the GPS, but should also take into account our RLTP. So we are kind of saying, all right, well, given a program and given that the funding might sit, around the midpoint, and then Auckland might receive, 40%, or in some cases, such as public transport, maybe closer to 50%, then here's a sense of where that might add up. It's intended to be an indicator. We can't make the calls about exactly what's going to be approved.
I guess you can't, and thank you. I guess you can't make the calls, but I guess under the public transport, and maybe it was to what Chair Richard was talking about, is that it does look as though I can't see us getting 60 to 70% of an activity class, and that, am I reading it correctly, that our indications that would be going out to the public would assume that we wouldn't get most of maybe a third of our non-discretionary, but we also wouldn't get funding for bus and transit lanes, Kiwi Rail strategic planning, the Botany Interchange, Northwest Rapid Link, the level crossings, the downtown buses, like significant projects we've had on the books for a long time. They would assume we would get 60 to 70, maybe over 75% of the country's activity class. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we're saying that's a risk, essentially, with that coloration. That given the range within that activity class, and we should recognise that there's a lot already in there that's committed. We're getting, Eastern Busway, the new trains, and various other elements are still flowing through the NLTF. But yeah, we think, given what we've seen out of the draft, it's a risk.
Okay, and maybe it's a political answer, but it does still seem like this is signalling a massive gutting of our future public transport infrastructure funding, like significant. And maybe that's a question for Chair Richard. I don't know if he's still here, but that those figures, putting those out, is quite something I've never seen before. Drastic. Sorry, I couldn't see you.
I'll make a quick comment. We're in the process of writing to the chair of NZTA, expressing our concerns at the consequences of the size of the relative activity classes and the likelihood under the current regime that high priority public transport infrastructure projects would not proceed. And again, that maintain, optimise, grow, new, if you look at the state highway, there are several $100 million in the next 3 years committed to long-term projects that don't have final funding. And so our preference would be to fund stuff to optimise what we've got now and get it finished ahead of, and you've got to start some new stuff, but fund the things that we've already got underway versus start new stuff.
Thank you very much. And just the last question, Chair, and it's hard to see the numbers. So the total number for cycling, walking and cycling is 200 million in the first 3 years. Well, like if everything got funded, which doesn't look like. And then what's the total quantum of this? You said 63 billion, but that's not really it, is it?
If you include all the proposals,
yeah.
63 billion, and that is one of the weaknesses that we've got in the draft, is that we didn't actually summarise all the proposals in one place.
And that's for the 10 years, though, including.
Yeah, that's for the 10 years.
And is that including all the RONs that we know that aren't funded?
Yeah. So that's all the proposals, right? It's and the actual funding, we don't know what the final funding will be. But, for example, the 2021 RLTP, a similar kind of number that was supposed to be fundable was more in the order of sort of 38 billion. Now, we've had increases in council funding since then, GPS increases, but, you know, there's quite a quantum there potentially. Eddie, do you want to just talk about the cycling number?
Sure. So, walking and cycling overall in the, just bear with me, in the 10 years is about 800 million. Sure. How that's classified is quite challenging because you have local roads with some walking and cycling components, so it's somewhat crude, but we've done our best to categorize it in terms of pure benefits or the majority of the benefit. In terms of the first 3 years, I don't have that number handy, but at least half, assuming the midpoint for walking and cycling, would be covered. And then it gets a little challenging further down.
Cool. So, by my reading, it's about 1% of the total budget is cycling, despite someone saying that we're trying to make the whole place cycle zealots. It's 1% of the overall completely exhausted budget. Thank you. Thanks for all the work on this. I know it's outrageously hard.
Welcome, Councillor Newman.
Oh, yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair. I'm sorry I'm not there today. I'm not feeling 100%. Hamish, thank you for the work that you're doing on this. I do want to make a comment later on, but can I just check, what's your confidence levels about meeting your planned renewals budgets as per this plan? Renewals seems to be given a reasonable degree of priority under the GPS. Obviously, the Board of Auckland Transport's indicated its strong desire to move forward with the renewals, given that we are needing to do a lot of catch-up here. Between now and when we sign this thing off, what's your level of confidence that we'll be able to make budget on that?
If you are meaning how much of our proposed renewals budget do we think is, you know, what's the likely funding risk from a GPS perspective? I would need to check and come back to you, but my recollection is that we're, in terms of the elements that would fit within the pothole reduction class, whatever it was called, I think that looks like it's very positive, which is why we haven't made a big deal out of it in the document. There are other renewals elements, and one of the things that just the added pieces of complexity is that the renewals, say, for other modes are split out into some of the improvements classes, but what we are saying is that they should be a priority for funding to make sure that we're renewing the network appropriately. So I think we're more confident about renewals. But again, you know, there's a lot of water to go under this bridge, and we don't know for sure until the GPS is finalised and we get the National Land Transport Plan.
And my other question, if I may, Chair, excuse me, with respect, I mean, I may want to make a comment on D, but with respect to level crossings, from my recollection, Auckland Transport's narrative around this and framing of the issue is that there is unlikely to be not even close to being near enough to meet the capital cost of the grade separation work at Takanini, so that essentially you are looking to focus more on the design and maybe progress some of the work in relation to acquisitions, but that the actual quantum of money is required to progress beyond there would be such a significant step change as to require a successful renegotiation with government. Otherwise, the funding for the Takanini grade separations is simply as unrealistic at this time. Is that, have I got that summarised correct?
The current estimate for the full think it's the 3 crossings at Takanini is in the order of $550 million. So that is conceptually achievable, but clearly, it's not affordable under the current budget. And given that the challenges that we see with the PT activity class from the NZTA side, there's clearly some challenges there. But I think what we're partially referring to in terms of that wider solution is, okay, well, we can do Takanini and that'll resolve some of those localised issues, and that's our sort of next priority of the rank. But we need a wider solution for the whole network. And, those costs are hundreds of millions, if not billions again. So Takanini might be in the realms of plausibility with additional funding, but we do need a solution for level crossings across the network.
Thank you, Chair. Reserve my right to speak. Thanks.
All right. I don't think there's any other questions. So, gentlemen, if you retreat behind the ramparts. And we'll now, it's a little unusual, but we'll address the question of the recommendations, seeing that the question has been made by a number of councillors there. So the recommendations in the first instance have come via the Mayor's office and have been picked up by Deputy Mayor Simpson and Councillor Fletcher in the recommendations. I've got something to say, but I'll hold my fire and perhaps go over to the Meredith, Desley and Luke to perhaps explain the context of all the writing in red. Desley, are you leading
Thanks,
off?
Chair. Look, I'm sorry, I was just handed this like literally seconds and the Mayor walked out the door. So I brought in the cavalry just in case I get this wrong. I just want to put together, I want to make a statement first that the key for me in this report is in item 12, because we don't theoretically have any formal role in the preparation of the RLTP. But it's been one of the Mayor's things that he has said to central government that he does want to have more control. So I suppose what this is beginning to be is a bit of the tumbleweed towards that point. And if you also note that the 2020 CCO review recommended that the RLTP be jointly prepared. So we've done a number of workshops around that, etc. And so my understanding, and these two will butt in if I get this wrong, my understanding for the first recommendation, which is recommendation B, is that because of the timing, remember it goes today, then it's the budget decisions as part of the LTP, then it goes to Regional Transport Committee, then it goes to Aucklanders, then it comes back to Tech, then it gets finally sent to the RLT. The theory behind A is that we have to confirm as part of the LTP what budget we're putting up, right? And that's a decision that's going to be made soon. So that's the first point. Anything else to add on that one? No? Right. The second one, well, the second one's almost saying the same thing, really, isn't it? What's the second one saying that's a bit different, Luke?
Yeah, the second one just builds upon C, just builds upon B, in terms of the governing body decision on the long-term plan next week will sort of set the level of funding for Auckland Transport. So the governing body can choose to provide a certain level of funding for Auckland Transport that may be different than what we see in the RLTP today. So that's where we're going with B and C, and we're just and C sort of further iterates that that today we're sort of being asked to endorse the document as a whole, not any particular project. So there may be a different decision next week as part of the LTP on any particular part of the RTP.
Right. So that means it could change next week. Yes.
Yes, in terms of, the level of funding may well change, and the LTP may also provide more or less funding for a particular activity. If councillors choose to do that, that would probably be a new approach.
Yeah. So we're not putting putting a false endorsement out there until we know exactly what our side of the bargain is. Right, okay.
Sorry, could I just ask a question at this point that might help? But we're
Can we
endorsing
just, can we just finish the,
draft
can we just finish the presentation and then we'll open it, then we'll make a view on that. So, Meredith, have you got anything to add to this?
Not in relation to those recommendations.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, Luke, have you finished? Okay, so,
Okay, so then the next one, the level crossings one, we have a workshop on June 26th on level crossings, but it's just highlighting, I think the Mayor wanted to highlight that the grade separation of level crossings was a high priority. And that workshop's coming up for us, and that will be done, because it's June 26th, that will be actually after the consultation period, so it's just highlighting on that.
That is, and on page 24 of the RLTP, it does note that it does say this project would be a high priority if additional funding becomes available. So we did just want to reiterate that while unfortunately we haven't been able to fund level crossings given the funding constraints, that we do still see this as a high priority. So we just wanted to indicate to government that we would like a further discussion on level crossing removals.
Okay, and then the last two are really just about accountability on the program from Auckland Transport to us about the things that they do. Would that be correct, Luke?
Yes, in terms of, so we have heard from the Minister of Transport that he is interested in looking at the RLTP in terms of looking at options for more council control over the RLTP. But as part of that, he has asked us to look at if there are any existing levers that we can use to improve council oversight of the RLTP. So we're just wanting to ask council and transport staff to work together to understand if there are any further existing levers that can be used.
Yeah, and that's right. And I think from our perspective, you'll know there are a number of existing mechanisms. We'd like to give that a considered look and a recommendation on this basis, really encouraging both Auckland Transport and Auckland Council to work together in terms of looking at that statutory framework, looking at what the options are to have that sort of ongoing greater control over the funding is a good idea if that's something that Council wants.
So I suppose, Mr. Chair, just from my perspective, because I was handed it and have to sort of move it, I was happy to do so. I was actually happy to endorse the Regional Land Transport Plan, right? Period, stop. But I can see kind of now why the Mayor's putting them up. I just think the one that we've just got to keep an eye on is the LTP funding, because that may or may not make a difference.
all right, okay.
This just highlights the fact that that's the case.
Okay, so we've heard the explanation for the rationale. There seems to be an element of logic to it from my perspective. Is there any further questions people have got of anyone that's spoken? Okay, yes, we have. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Darby. C is making no sense to me. Could we maybe explain that again?
No, we might just drop C, put into Lee.
Okay.
But you're not alone.
It's a start. Cool. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so if we have the agreement of the mover and seconder, Councillor Fletcher online? Yes, I think
yes,
she is.
I'm online and I'm listening closely.
Yes.
And perhaps members are beginning to understand the complex legislative environment that we're working in and why we want change.
Okay, so the mover and seconder are willing to allow C to be withdrawn then, is that's what I'm hearing?
Based on Mayor's Office suggestion, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
May I just ask whether our executive officer in Barry Potter has any further commentary on that, and whether that C will, in being removed, may change things. It would be good to hear from Barry on that.
Sure.
Thank you for the question. I'm only just receiving this as councillors are receiving it as well. So I haven't had a chance to go through these. I understand the story around why C would be removed and the advice we've received from Mayor's office and from Meredith is that that doesn't have any great implications. So take it out.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. No worries. So we've got. So these are just speaking order, is it?
These are the comments.
Okay. Right. Councillor Darby.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm struggling with all those additional recommendations other than the A. Can I, Luke, you're in a difficult position, Luke, here because you're coming in late, and I read that particular page, Luke, of the draft RLTP. Are you referring to the page where it refers to the Takanini level crossings? Because there are two numbers on it. There's the numbers on our agenda, and then there's the actual pages.
Yes, I've got the particular. Yeah, I've got the particular document here, so it's 24 of the RTP, but it will be a couple of pages different on your agenda. Sorry.
Can you just read that section that you're referring to then? Because
yeah, so it reads, one dependency is the Takanini level crossing removal stage 1 project, which is not proposed to be funded for construction this decade due to its high total cost and funding limitations. However, it is important that all agencies work together to agree a way forward, including a wider funding solution to address the overall grade separation issues across the rail network. This project would be a higher priority if additional funding becomes available.
okay, so on that then, Chair, that recommendation is not specific to what's being referred to. And if you pick out that one, here's the risk of the political pick and mix, is you get back to the old form of previous councils. Like there is criteria that ourselves and Auckland Transport have signed up to. Now, if you go to the full section where Takanini is referred to, you'll find others of equal high priority. Airport to Botany, you'll find Northwest Rapid Transit, you'll find a number of other things. So the question is, why not those? They're identified. I think this is just really dangerous, picking out a political winner. This is not the way to approach the RLTP. You know, you run through the criteria and you do your assessments that way. You do it through those multiple lenses. And I really plead, let's not go back to the form of old councils where it was not through those really robust processes. It became a political pick and mix. And the others too, they're mostly noting, but of course notes also carry weight. But I just don't see merit in the balance after the A. I honestly don't.
Mr. Chair, can I help here? Because this is difficult for all of us, right? I haven't been through these with the Mayor really. And Luke's trying to defend something he potentially didn't write. So I just think you should just let it go and vote for what you want to vote for and don't vote for what you don't want to vote for.
I'll make a summary comment at the end once people have had a chance to ask the questions of the people here. So is there anyone else? Wanting to ask questions? Ken, you want to ask a question?
It's just what I was trying to explain this morning, but it comes with no direction. I'm looking around the table at everybody, and everyone's puffing at this stuff. How am I supposed to have faith in what we've got up there? Okay, but it still brings, I've learned those lessons too. Yeah, I don't know. It just is, I agree with what Councillor just said. It's, yeah, what Councillor Darby just said. We need to have more structure to our stuff than just all this wish list, which is always trying to accommodate everybody.
Okay, Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. I share a lot of the concerns that have been raised. I have a suggestion for B that I think might just clarify, which is to put draft in front of RLTP. I think the intention there is that what we put out in the consultation, noting that, you know, those documents will be finalised after we vote next week on what the money will be. And that makes sense to me, that we're saying, can you please update based on what we vote on next week? I think that's pretty sensible. So we just need to put draft in front of our RLTP to fix that one, as it were. For D, so for E and F, I feel like they're not actually relevant to they're not related to the agenda item. They're actually separate things, and if we're going to consider voting on E and F, then actually we need some advice and we need a discussion. Like, they may well be fine, but they shouldn't be raised in this process. Like, they should have an agenda report or a notice of motion attached to them. They're probably going to be fine if they do, but you can't add resolutions that don't relate to the agenda report. So that's my issue with E and F. And so I'd like to understand that. Is there a rush on this? Can we put those on the next agenda, E and F, through an agenda report, and then we actually get it ahead of time, have some transparency? Because I would support that. Is that possible?
Through the chair, just in terms of the timing of the request for staff to provide advice, my understanding is that one of the reasons the mayoral office was keen for it to be dealt with now was so that if we wanted to include something in the final LTP, we'd have the advice ahead of that. Sorry. Sonia.
Yeah. So this is for advice for the LTP, which is next week?
Yes. Yeah,
so that's an extraordinary item then, isn't it? Like.
So I think the purpose of the resolutions, which have been put together by the mayoral office, for the purpose of, you know, acknowledging that what we're doing here is something that is not provided for in the legislation. So we have limited control over the RLTP. And as Luke mentioned, there's been discussions with the Minister about what our existing mechanisms are in relation to exerting a form of control. So the purpose of this is really just asking Council to provide staff with a mandate to provide some advice. Whether you do anything with that advice is a separate question at a later date, but it's really just asking Council staff and Transport staff to work together to look at the statutory framework to see if there are any mechanisms about control of that capital program funding on an ongoing basis.
I don't know, this is the kind of stuff that we shouldn't get.
Councillor Lee, you've got a question?
Not a question, Mr. Chair, just a very brief comment, but I'll wait if that's the case.
Okay, Councillor Walker, you've got a question?
So one of the concerns that I've got, and I'm sorry if I harp on about it, is the disruptions that are occurring across the transport sector globally that involve electrification and full self-drive are hugely significant. The Chinese government, for example, is opening up full self-drive in China. The development of AI and the neural net, the computer capacity and the like is on an exponential point. So you're going to see the deployment of this in the short term. Okay, it is happening now. The consequences of this are nothing short of hugely significant as it goes to public transport, because public transport will not be able to compete with a vehicle that you will just order, will arrive, will not have a driver, is running off renewable energy and power. The cost of it is incredibly small, and this is going to happen. So my question is, where is the information around this as it affects our investment, as it affects mobility, as it affects safety? Because vehicles that have got 8 cameras and radars can be shown to be significantly safer than others. So my question is,
he just said my question.
I have said my question is, so where is the information around that as it comes to our investment and the changes that are occurring in the network?
Okay.
Where is it?
Unfortunately, the staff have retreated, so that'll have to remain a rhetorical question.
Well, it's not there.
So the mayor was going to try and come on to say he's not there. Okay, so we can't really wait for him. So I'll give you my view and ruling as the chair, and I've listened carefully to what people have said, and there's been any number of relevant points brought up. I certainly have reservations about any moves where we get the kind of cherry picking that perhaps characterise previous councils. That would indeed be a retrograde step, and one of the advantages of at least the Auckland Transport has been a relative objectivity as far as projects across the Auckland region goes. So I don't for a minute think that anything here is going to undermine that. So the fundamental resolution here is the endorsement or otherwise of the draft regional land transport plan for public consultation. As with any resolutions moved in council, councillors are quite at liberty to move their own resolutions in the first instance and to move amendments thereafter. In many cases, in my personal view, they can add marginal benefit to the main resolution, but there's any number of instances in some committees and working parties more than others where they read like an encyclopedia of noting and requesting. So this is not beyond the realms of that well-established custom and practice. If we go to the specifics here in B and C, we have the RLTP referenced directly in the wording, so they come as a consequence of the main A. We have a noting with respect of the grade separation of of level crossings as a high priority. Well, that's amounts to little more than a statement of fact. It doesn't. I heard Luke refer to the network as a whole, and as I understand it, the grade separation has been identified, as I said, as a high priority, and in fact the CRL can't meet its targets in the first 10 years if that doesn't happen. So it's just a statement of fact. The last two, E and F, are a little bit more tangential in their relationship to the draft regional land transport plan, but nonetheless go to some sort of connection in terms of control and oversight of the capital program or the outcome of that, and we have that reference to exercise greater oversight. So these are themes that have been brought up in the past, tied in to the various plans, and in particular to this one. So what I would suggest is that we'll proceed with these recommendations. Of course, people are and I'm more than happy to take them individually, and people can vote and speak the way they want. So, and that's been very clear, but I'm not going to withdraw them. They've been moved and seconded. I've accepted them as having some association with the main business of the day, which is approving the draft plan to put out for consultation. So that's my ruling, folks. I'll go through, I'll allow people, of course, to speak to the items, and if you want me to, I'll take them and we can vote on them separately. So having said that, I'll open it up to speakers. Councillor Newman.
Oh, look, Chair, look, it would be nice for greater Auckland Council political oversight of the Capital Works program. Bit surprised how these recommendations ended up at this point, but okay, fine. I'm just happy for that to go through, because I just coming back to be above, and I appreciate the officers step back from the table, it is going to be a challenge because I'm still unsure at this stage as to what can be funded in the 10-year plan in the transport space, noting that the transport budget is very contingent on projects being part funded in accordance with the policy and strategic direction that NZTA has to follow to give effect to the direction of government of the day. So I hope that we will have a better understanding of that in the coming days, because I'm still not sure as to whether we can realistically achieve everything that people would like to achieve under the pay more, do more, but it sounds like we're going to have a debate about E&F at this point. So I'll leave it there. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Lee, you had a comment to make?
Yes, I support the recommendations. To be frank, it's a mediocre plan, probably almost certainly because, like most of the plans we do nowadays, the statutory plans, we don't open them up to the ordinary people to make submissions. And for some reason, councillors and staff would prefer not to do that when they're given the choice. However, some really good ideas can come through via that process. It worked well in the past. However, such as it didn't happen, it's an okay plan. There's nothing visionary about it. The key point, I think, of the recommendations is the council is under a lot of pressure from the public to achieve value for money, which we are not getting from transport right now. And I think that is the message, and I'm quite happy to support it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Baker?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, I just, this is for the draft to go out for public consultation, for people, the public to have their say. It's what we're having the discussion about. And so, you know, that's common sense. It makes sense, you know. We'll adjust it. Hopefully there'll be more money and we'll be in a positive sense. D is neither here nor there, because we all know that they're a high priority. No one will argue against that. There's a whole heap of stuff, as Councillor Darby talked about, there's a whole heap of stuff we'd love to put in there. But what it's there for, I don't know, because it's not going to be a low priority. E&F, totally the wrong time to be discussing this. And yes, we can have a discussion. Great that the ministers talked about it, but this is about the draft going out. We don't need anything to have this discussed today. I agree that this is a big thing and it needs to have its own little time slot and information. I'm unhappy that it's even been put up in the way that it's been put up. And, you know, at the end of the day, in terms of this, I'm actually pretty ambivalent about whether it comes back here into whether this council has oversight of the RLTP, because there will be absolutely nowhere for the people who sit around this table to hide. When we are setting the direction of Auckland Transport, we are responsible. And so no longer will we have the ability to point the finger at Auckland Transport and say, hang on a minute. So these shouldn't be part of this. They make no sense in terms of what we are talking about today. And I certainly will not be supporting E&F when it comes through to it.
Okay. Councillor Ferry?
Forgot to put my hand up. All right. I just have to agree with Andy, which doesn't happen often. I'll leave it there. To be fair, I think you were agreeing with me first.
Councillor Turner? Okay. Councillor Hills and Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, and I feel a bit bad for Councillor Simpson, Deputy Mayor, because she's the mover, but it wasn't her words. So I think it would be good to have, if this happens again, the mover stays in the room, so we can have the explanation. I'm not sure I can vote for any of it, although I'll have to probably vote for but I just don't endorse it. I mean, what this is showing with those reds and greens is a significant change. And yes, the GPS does show that significant change, but this doesn't show, in my opinion, that we are leading or bidding or telling the government or the community that this is what we prioritise as a city. We're telling the community that this is what they might get because the government's told us. And I'm not sure we've ever done that under any previous government. It's just bow down and say that, okay, we'll change all our priorities for that. So this is a fundamental change. This will leave us going backwards on climate, backwards on safety, backwards on public transport. And, you know, did want to point out that only 1% of it is on walking and cycling, which I think that's about the same as last time. So when people complain about it, we've got to really think it's a very tiny part of the budget. But those public transport changes and cuts, and the fact that we will not get money for the prioritised budgets we've had on our books for a long time, and we're going to be having other projects come into our community that we haven't had prioritised, as the chair said, and others, I think is a massive concern, and this is taking our city backwards. So I'm not sure I can support any of this because I don't endorse that draft. It is a fundamental change of where we've been going in the last 10, 15, 20 years even as a city. So thanks.
Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hills and I are in concert, which happens actually quite a bit, I think. But yeah, look, I'm concerned about the amount of work that's even been gone into the climate element in terms of modelling, all the rest of it. It's extremely unclear. We can pass this today. It's unclear what the actual emissions results will happen were it to go through. We passed our climate goals here. I need to at least know for certain that the transport emissions will go down. I don't even know for certain that they will go down at all, never mind to meet our goals, right? So what we need, and I keep saying this, is that we need a plan to be drawn up that this is the plan that you have if you want to meet your climate goals. At the very least, it can be a test case for the plan that we actually go to the public with. We can say plan A and plan B, right? But we don't get that. And that's extremely disappointing and frustrating to me. When we passed those climate goals, that was democratic process here that had the huge support of the community. So I'm frustrated that we just keep ignoring this, even to the level of planning. The other thing that the other concern that I have is, you know, again, I'm a broken record, but I feel like I'm disempowered and confused again around what this is supposed to actually do. Is this our bid to the government, or do we have to align with their goals? Who's actually governing the city in the transport space? Look, it reminds me, I'm sitting here and remembering when I was a lawyer and we go into a negotiation, right? I wouldn't go into any negotiation trying to agree with the other side as much as possible to the detriment of my own client. And that is how I'm feeling right now, is that we're going into a negotiation without any force, right? It's very frustrating to me. But at the end of the day, look, it is a consultation. So I will vote A through with a lot of reluctance, just so that the public can tell us for the 100th time that they want us to actually act on our climate goals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. Big thanks to Hamish and Robert for all the work that they've done on this and for your leadership to Chair Leggett. Apologies. I think, Hamish, I hope you get to see a bit more of your daughter who was trying to get hold of you the other week now. And just what I have seen over the last few years is a stronger collaboration between Auckland Transport and Auckland Council in this space. I understand that you you had a strategy, and the strategy was to keep some of our stuff in there while trying to meet that place that might align with the GPS. So it's a balancing act, and we're going to have to come back and see, or you'll see how well you do with that. So for that reason, I won't be supporting ENF. I feel like it's the wrong time, wrong place. It undermines actually the really good work that Auckland Council have been doing alongside Auckland Transport, and that we do have oversight. Agree with Councillor Baker though. I do look forward to this coming back and sitting at our feet So we take responsibility for what we are putting in there because, and not always pointing the finger at Auckland Transport. So just a big thank you for all the work that you've done in such a short time frame to get this across the line. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Walker.
So I indicated my concerns earlier. This is a 10-year plan. It doesn't forecast the significant disruptions that are going to be occurring within the transport space that are of a high order of magnitude and are imminent. It doesn't, in my opinion, adequately address climate. I don't know what the repercussions of these investments are, frankly, and I raise that issue again and again. We should be evaluating everything on that basis. And I do not think also that the overriding objective, which should be enhancing mobility, is apparent to me as it goes to just public transport, but also private vehicles and related that may well form an even more important part of the network into the future. So all I can do is raise these issues. This is a 10-year plan. It doesn't address them. And the other area that I'm unclear about is the funding for ferries and decarbonisation in that area. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you. I'm just sitting here trying to figure out how am I going to get the advocacy through that my local board presented on yesterday, where they said there's hardly any investment going into Maungakiki Tamaki in this 10-year plan. And I'm trying to think, because they're not going to get that from their own budgets, and they're not the only local board in that position. And what they were advocating for was actually achieving climate goals, because it's about a bus terminal, upgrading a train station, better bus services and PT services for areas that want to do that. They want to get out of their cars. So just trying to see where it all aligns up. And I agree with the sentiment shared that this is going backwards and it's kowtowing, is it kowtowing to what governments say? So where is the document that's about what we want to see for our city, as opposed to what we think we can get over the line with the government? And yeah, so I'm kind of in the same boat as Councillor Baker, just probably endorsing this to go out for public consultation, but definitely not endorsing this as the RLTP, but wanting the public to have their say, wanting local boards to have their say and repeat what they already said yesterday. Thanks.
Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, my concern is not about this sort of the detail of the land transport plan, but just to do with the process that we're facing here. I'm always suspicious of red amendments to something that come right at the last minute, and I can't quite work out why. What would happen if they weren't there is the question I keep asking, or why they are there because they matter. And then I see things that are sort of almost sort of like standout, nothing to do with anything. Note that grade separation of level crossings has been identified as a high priority. Why is that a resolution? I don't get it. There's a whole lot of things that are high priority and a whole lot. Why is that one singled out? So I think it's incumbent on the mayor and mayor's office to, if they want to throw this at the last minute at us, to have a really good briefing note come with it to explain. B is for the following, C does this, well C's gone now I see, D means that if we don't put that in, I mean if we don't put up D, will we never see level crossings again? Of course not. So why is it there? And what would happen if it wasn't there? What difference would that make? That's all I want to know. What difference, if we just said let's delete D now, what would be the damage? So I'm trying to work out why we've been given this big blob of red that comes flying in, and I go, right, well, we better work out what the implications of these are, and it seems to be piecemeal at best and a bit of a bloody shambles at worst. And I'd like to vote for it, but I don't know what it is. So
Democracy at work.
It's democracy at work, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we've had all our speakers. Thank you for everyone's contribution. So my plan here is to take A and the rest of them separately. I hope we all realise we do have to go out for public consultation, and people have made any number of good points about what the public response may well be to that, but we do have to go out with something. For the remainder, I can take the red stuff, I can take that as a whole, or I can take it separately. Would you like me to take the red stuff as a whole? Okay, all right. Oh. Okay, so it looks like I have to take it separately then, folks. Let's get started. Okay, I'll put A. All those in favour of A, please say yes.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Okay, carried. B, we can take this on the voices, I guess. B, I'll if we could take the voting list down, I can. B, request. Okay, B, request Auckland Transport to update Auckland Council's transport components in the draft RLTP following decisions made by the governing body when adopting the long-term plan 2024-2034. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against?
No.
Defeated? We go to C, which has taken care of itself. We go to D. If we could bring up D, please, Lata and Sonia. D, note that grade separation or level crossing has been identified as a high priority. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against?
No.
Defeated? And abstention? 2 abstentions. We go to E. Request Auckland Council staff working collaboratively with Auckland Transport to provide advice on how to enhance Auckland Council's control and oversight over the Auckland Transport Capital Program, especially the parts of the program funded or part funded by Auckland Council using existing powers provided for under legislation. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against?
No.
Defeated? F.
I'll stay the next two.
And sorry, abstentions. And tell me if you tell the officers if you want your name recorded at the end of this. I think we can do that. So that brings us mercifully to F. Recommend to the Mayor and Budget Committee that they consider how Auckland Council's long-term plan 2434 could signal its intent to exercise greater oversight over the Council's share of the funding for Auckland Transport's capital program and preserve optionality for Council to make decisions following any advice received per E. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against?
No.
Defeated. Okay, that